He had the talent to dominate an era, size, skill, and intensity that few centers could match. But anger followed him everywhere, shaping his reputation faster than his greatness. One reputation, reinforced over years, quietly closed doors. Talent alone could never reopen. This is the story of DeMarcus Cousins and the career that slipped away. Welcome to Off-Court Truths, where we break down how talent, temperament, and perception collide, and how reputation can quietly decide an NBA career's fate. DeMarcus Cousins entered the NBA with a reputation already attached to his name. From his college days at Kentucky, his talent was unquestioned, but so was his volatility. Cousins was dominant, emotional, and unfiltered, a player who played every possession like a personal confrontation. Drafted 5th overall in 2010 by the Sacramento Kings, he was immediately handed the keys to a struggling franchise and asked to become its foundation before he was emotionally ready to carry that weight. On the court, Cousins was a force. He could score in the post, step out and shoot, pass like a guard, and punish defenders with sheer physicality. By his mid-20s, he was an all-NBA level center, putting up historic numbers in an era that was beginning to move away from traditional big men. To many analysts, he was the most skilled center in basketball. But the environment around him was chaos. Sacramento cycled through coaches, executives, and systems at a relentless pace. Stability never arrived. Losing piled up. And Cousins, fiercely competitive and deeply sensitive to perceived disrespect, absorbed every failure personally. Technical fouls mounted. Public confrontations became common. Officials, opponents, even teammates felt his frustration. Over time, the narrative hardened. Cousins was labeled difficult, emotional, uncoachable. Whether fair or not, that reputation began to travel faster than his production, and as his prime approached, one question started to follow him everywhere he went. Could DeMarcus Cousins ever escape the image built around his anger, or would it define his career before his talent ever could? The breaking point for DeMarcus Cousins arrived when frustration finally outweighed patience, both his own and the league's. Years of losing in Sacramento had taken a visible toll. Cousins argued with officials nightly, clashed with coaches publicly, and carried the emotional burden of a franchise that never stabilized around him. Each technical foul reinforced the same narrative: talent without control. Even when he delivered elite performances, the conversation drifted back to temperament. Then came the trade in 2017. Sacramento sent Cousins to New Orleans during All-Star Weekend, a moment that felt less like a fresh start and more like an indictment. For Cousins, it was confirmation that reputation had overtaken loyalty. In New Orleans, paired with Anthony Davis, he finally had structure and a winning direction. The basketball was brilliant. The pressure eased. For the first time, it looked like Cousins might outrun the label, and then his body betrayed him. An Achilles tear ended his season abruptly, right as he was playing the best basketball of his career. The injury didn't just pause momentum, it froze perception. Front offices recalculated risk. Patience thinned. The margin Cousins once lived on disappeared overnight. In that moment, anger was no longer the biggest obstacle. Uncertainty was. Cousins stood at the edge of his prime with a reputation already formed and a body suddenly in question. The career that once seemed inevitable began to slip. Not because of one mistake, but because timing, trust, and tolerance all ran out at once. DeMarcus Cousins' career unfolded along a timeline where elite talent was constantly forced to wrestle with instability, perception, and misfortune. From the beginning, his story was never just about basketball ability, it was about context. Sacramento gave him opportunity without infrastructure. Coaches changed, systems reset, voices contradicted each other. In that vacuum, Cousins became both the offense and the emotional barometer of a franchise that never found its footing. Every loss felt personal, every whistle felt unfair, and every outburst reinforced a reputation that soon became inseparable from his name. As the years passed, Cousins' production only grew. He averaged numbers few centers in NBA history could match, combining brute force with finesse and vision. Yet the Kings kept losing. National conversations framed him as the common denominator, even as roster turnover suggested deeper dysfunction. Technical fouls piled up, ejections followed, clips of arguments circulated more widely than highlights. The label hardened, gifted, but volatile. Whether that label captured the full truth mattered less than the fact that it stuck. The trade to New Orleans was supposed to reset the narrative. Paired with Anthony Davis, Cousins finally played meaningful basketball with a clear identity. The offense flowed. The wins came. His demeanor softened as responsibility was shared. For the first time, Cousins looked free, no longer carrying a franchise alone. Analysts began revising opinions. The conversation shifted from problem to dominant. It felt like the timeline had finally turned in his favor. Then the Achilles injury struck. In one moment, everything changed. The league's most unforgiving injury arrived at the worst possible time, right before free agency. Cousins' value plummeted overnight. Teams hesitated. Medical projections overshadowed past production. He signed short-term deals, chasing opportunity while rebuilding trust in his body. Golden State offered a chance to contend, but injuries returned. Momentum never stabilized. Each subsequent stop followed a similar pattern. Brief flashes of the old Cousins, lingering questions about mobility, front offices weighing upside against risk. The anger that once dominated headlines was no longer the issue. Availability was. But reputations don't reset easily. The earlier narrative lingered, compounding concerns and shortening patience. The timeline of DeMarcus Cousins reveals how quickly control can slip away when multiple factors collide. Talent remained. Desire remained. What vanished was margin. Injuries narrowed it. Reputation compressed it. Timing eliminated it. By the time Cousins tried to reassert himself, the league had already recalibrated expectations. This wasn't a single downfall. It was erosion, gradual, relentless, and irreversible. A career that once looked destined for dominance became a case study in how perception and circumstance can quietly redirect even the most gifted paths. To understand DeMarcus Cousins, you have to understand the psychology of a player who felt everything intensely. Cousins was not driven by indifference or ego alone. He was driven by pride, sensitivity, and a deep need to be respected. From early in his career, he carried the weight of expectation without the emotional tools to manage constant failure around him. Losing didn't just frustrate him, it questioned his worth. Every whistle felt like judgment. Every critique felt personal. Cousins processed emotion externally. When he felt wronged, he reacted. When he felt unheard, he escalated. That transparency made him authentic to some and exhausting to others. In a league that rewards composure and political restraint, his honesty became a liability. Officials tightened leashes, coaches braced for confrontation. Over time, his reactions stopped being seen as situational and started being seen as habitual. There is also the psychology of environment. In Sacramento, instability normalized tension. Without consistent leadership or winning culture, Cousins had no buffer between emotion and consequence. In New Orleans, with shared responsibility and direction, his demeanor improved. Proof that context mattered. But the league rarely revisits context once a reputation is formed. After the Achilles injury, another psychological layer emerged: fear. Cousins no longer trusted his body. Anger, once fueled by competition, became intertwined with anxiety about decline. Each setback reinforced the belief that time was running out. That urgency shortened patience even further. DeMarcus Cousins was never simply angry. He was emotionally exposed in a profession that punishes exposure. His greatest strength, playing with raw feeling, became the trait that narrowed his path when the circumstances stopped protecting him. The climax of DeMarcus Cousins' career came quietly, without a single headline moment to mark the end. It arrived when the league collectively stopped waiting. After the Achilles tear, Cousins entered free agency expecting skepticism, but not abandonment. He believed teams would remember the player he had been, the dominance he had shown just months earlier. Instead, offers disappeared. Long-term commitments vanished. What remained were short deals, minimum contracts, and prove-it situations that carried no margin for error. Each stop felt like a trial. In Golden State, injuries returned before rhythm could form. In Los Angeles, flashes of skill appeared, But the role was smaller and the patience thinner. Every setback confirmed the league's fears. The conversation was no longer about Cousins' anger. It was about whether his body could survive an NBA season at all. Reputation and injury combined into a verdict harsher than either alone. The true breaking moment wasn't a missed game or a public outburst. It was the realization that teams were planning around him, not with him. Decisions were made quickly. Leashes were short. Opportunities ended without ceremony. The league that once feared his power now feared his unpredictability, physical and emotional. In that space, Cousins faced the hardest truth of all. Talent does not guarantee time. Once patience disappears, careers don't end with drama. They fade. The NBA didn't banish DeMarcus Cousins. It simply moved on, leaving him to confront how quickly the window can close when trust, health, and tolerance all run out together. The consequences of DeMarcus Cousins' unraveling settled in slowly, but they proved permanent. Once teams stopped viewing him as a cornerstone and started seeing him as a contingency, his leverage vanished. Contracts shrank, roles narrowed, minutes became conditional. Every missed rotation, every slow recovery, every emotional reaction carried outsized weight. The tolerance that once existed for a dominant star no longer applied to a player fighting to stay in the league. Financially, the impact was severe. The max-level future Cousins had been headed toward disappeared after the Achilles injury, replaced by minimum deals and short-term commitments. What should have been the most secure years of his career became unstable, forcing constant adjustment and uncertainty. In a league that prizes reliability, Cousins' availability became a question he could never fully answer. Public perception hardened as well. The early reputation for anger, once amplified by losing environments, now returned without context. Moments of frustration were no longer seen as competitive fire, but as confirmation of an old narrative. Even when Cousins accepted reduced roles and tried to fit into winning cultures, patience was thin. The past spoke louder than the present. Emotionally, the toll was heavy. Cousins had to reconcile the player he knew himself to be with how the league now treated him. Pride clashed with reality. Acceptance came slowly. The NBA did not strip him of his skill. It stripped him of the time and trust needed to reestablish it. DeMarcus Cousins didn't lose everything in one moment. He lost it in stages as consequences accumulated and the space to recover quietly disappeared. DeMarcus Cousins' comeback was never about returning to dominance. It was about survival inside a league that had already decided how much patience it had left. After the injuries, the trades, and the short-term deals, Cousins adjusted in ways many never expected. He accepted reduced roles. He embraced mentorship. He tried to prove that maturity had replaced volatility. On the court, flashes of his old brilliance still appeared. Soft touch around the rim, sharp passing, a feel for space that never left him. But flashes were no longer enough. Each opportunity came with conditions. Play within a narrow role. Stay healthy. Stay quiet. The margin for error was razor thin, and Cousins felt it every night. One technical foul carried more weight than 10 solid possessions. One missed rotation overshadowed an efficient quarter. Teams evaluated him not on who he was becoming, but on who he used to be. The narrative followed him into every locker room. Emotionally, the adjustment was brutal. Cousins had spent his life playing on edge, using intensity as fuel. Now he was asked to mute the very trait that defined him. Growth demanded restraint, but restraint came at the cost of identity. The league didn't need him to be dominant anymore. It needed him to be dependable. That shift is one of the hardest transitions any former star can face. There was no dramatic return to stardom, no single game that changed everything. Instead, Cousins carved out moments, useful stretches, veteran contributions, signs that he still belonged. But the clock never stopped ticking. Opportunities shortened. Calls came less often. In the end, DeMarcus Cousins didn't fail to adapt. He adapted too late, after reputation and injury had already rewritten the terms. His comeback wasn't a victory lap. It was a lesson in how quickly the NBA asks players to become someone else, and how unforgiving it can be when the past arrives before the present is fully understood. DeMarcus Cousins' story exposes how thin the line is between intensity and isolation. The same fire that made him dominant also shaped a reputation that became impossible to outrun when circumstances change. Anger in winning environments is often tolerated. In losing ones, it becomes a label. And when injury removes patience from the equation, that label hardens into destiny. His career reminds us that the NBA does not only evaluate talent, it evaluates containment. How safe is the investment? How predictable is the outcome? How much risk comes with the emotion? Cousins didn't lose his place because he stopped caring. He lost it because caring too loudly for too long made organizations uneasy when they no longer needed his upside. The lesson is uncomfortable but clear. Passion must evolve into control. Reputation must be managed before it manages you. In a league with endless talent and limited patience, the window to change perception is far smaller than most players ever realize. DeMarcus Cousins had the talent to dominate, but timing and perception changed everything. Which NBA story should we uncover next on Off-Court Truths?